Hello, and welcome to this first movie review that I'm going to be doing on this channel. I have been reviewing music so far, but I am going to be reviewing films as well going forward. Not quite as often, but I definitely am a movie lover, and I have a lot to say after I see a movie. So it's definitely something I have to touch on. This first review that I'm going to be doing is of Disney's new live action remake of Beauty and the Beast, which was released on March 17th of 2017 this year. And I have a lot to say about this film, and it's something that it's probably one of the most anticipated Disney films that I can ever kind of imagine, because I love Disney and I grew up with Disney, as all of us did, but I don't remember there was ever being such hype for a Disney film. I mean, this was like years of speculation. I remember this movie being like talked about like 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember Emma Watson being considered as the role of Belle. I mean, I considered that had been pretty much casted like 6 years ago. So, Emma Watson playing Belle in this Disney remake that was supposed to happen. It was being teased for a very, very long time. And I'm not surprised that it was made. It's one of their most successful Disney animated films, and it is my favorite Disney animated feature film. So, going into this, I have high expectations, obviously. And of course, did it live up to them? That was always my fear. I'm always weary, especially of this day and age with films. I'm always weary about, if something is going to live up to the hype. And this film had a lot of it. And ultimately, I do believe that it did live up to almost all of it. There were some areas, obviously, that didn't work as well, but no movie's perfect. For me, I first of all will just say, for Emma Watson as Belle, I still think it was a really smart choice for casting. I know that the singing was definitely the probably weakest part of definitely her performance, but probably of the overall film in general. It's not to say that it was horrible and I couldn't stand it. It's just, you kind of forget about it and you kind of look past it when you're especially so excited about the rest of the movie. You've already kind of heard a little bit of how she was singing. I was very interested to hear how she was going to sing, because it's can she sing really? I mean, no one can be talented at everything. She's an amazing actress. I still think she really embodied the character, and I mean, the bookish Hermione aspects that she carries with her from the Harry Potter films did make her an obvious choice for one of the more bookish Disney princesses, who's almost not a princess in the stereotypical sense. It makes Emma Watson the perfect contender, so I have no problem with her playing the lead. Um, in fact, the best thing I think about this movie is the casting, because I do think, especially in the non-lead roles, the casting is done really well. All of the, Ian McKellen as Cogsworth, Ewan McGregor as Lumiere, Emma Thompson as Mrs. Potts, Luke Evans as Gaston, and Dan Stevens as the Beast. People are saying his performance was maybe not quite as strong. His singing is very beautiful. I think his singing voice is definitely on par with the great sort of Broadway musicals that you've seen of Beauty and the Beast, and he brings this sort of very theatrical element to the table in this film that is a little bit different from Emma Watson's style, which I think complements it nicely. And I do really appreciate that. Now, Luke Evans kind of does steal the show a little bit with his Gaston. He puts so much into this character, and he really makes you kind of loathe this character but love him at the same time. He almost presents himself as possibly one of those, villains who could actually turn out to be good. And then, of course, the story. He actually really does try to kill the Beast, even after the Beast grants him mercy to live. And so, of course, it doesn't end with a happy ending for him. But so there's no redemption for Gaston, but his character almost leads you to really believe, especially in this portrayal, that there is more to him than just an arrogant narcissist. Now, there's so much to unpack. I do want to get really deep into the production of this film, because you are dealing with an adaptation, and you're dealing with a screenplay that's very heavily influenced off of an original. Sometimes almost could feel word for word, and that is an interesting sort of dilemma that Hollywood's going to be facing when they're doing these live action films. This is one of the first live action films Disney has attempted where they are literally just kind of remaking the film. They are adding things into it, but with the Jungle Book, they were kind of taking the story and kind of exploring it in a kind of different way than the original Jungle Book. And with Cinderella, they completely changed up like a lot of aspects of the story. They didn't use any of the original music from the original Cinderella films. So this remake is the first kind of real attempt by Disney to just, I don't want to say copy and paste, but it is, it's something that I can see they're definitely trying down the pike to do more of. There's a live action Mulan that they have planned. There's a live action Lion King. Well, that will be CGI, like Jungle Book, directed by Jon Favreau, which I'm really excited about, and other films as well coming out that I've heard they want to do Aladdin. They're going to go through all of these for better or for worse because it does make a lot of money. And I have mixed feelings about them necessarily deciding to go through every single film in their catalog. I kind of hope that there are some that they don't touch, but I'm fine with them remaking Beauty and the Beast. I feel like it was a long enough time period between when the original was released and the new one, though I think it's great that they employed like Celine Dion to sing on the soundtrack. Now, of course, the traditional Beauty and the Beast song that was originally sung by her in the end credits is now sung by Ariana Grande and John Legend, which I actually believe, an unpopular opinion, they did actually a pretty good job. I mean, I think the production of the song, I do get that it's a little karaoke, but I don't know. It's a 2017 remake. I kind of wasn't expecting it to be like the exact kind of orchestral, epic sort of thing that the first one was. I get that it's very Disney-fied. It's almost like the Disney Channel version of the, Walt Disney Pictures version of Beauty and the Beast. But I still appreciate it for what it was. And I think Ariana and John Legend's vocals are beautiful. So I don't necessarily have such a huge problem with that song. A lot of people really disliked it. But I'm glad that Celine came in because one of the highlights for this song are some of the is obviously the musical pieces, most of them being rehashed musical pieces we've heard before, like Belle and Be Our Guest, these great classic songs, which I think are done pretty well and carried pretty well, albeit there are some vocal issues with people like Emma Watson, like for example. But How Does the Moment Last Forever by Celine Dion is a gorgeous rendition of a song, and it fits so beautifully into the soundtrack. I was really excited to hear that Celine Dion was going to, and well, she didn't write the song, but she performed it. It was Alan Menken who composed this song, as he did with the original, which I'm so glad they employed him again for this, because again, it's just, Disney is nothing without Alan Menken at the helm of creating this music. And Celine's performance is just, it ties in everything. I mean, hearing it at the end credits is one of the highlights of the movie for me, like seeing all the, cast credits and everything. They're so elaborately done with the animation and everything. It's just so heartfelt and heartwarming, and it's an emotional song too. It's kind of dark and it's really haunting and beautiful, and it fits Celine. Her music is just so epic and lush and heartfelt. So I'm so glad that they wrote this amazing song, which is of course incorporated into the actual movie itself, sung by Emma Watson. But it's of course more strong, I do think, when Celine sings it. They also have another original song, well, two more original songs I want to talk about here. Days in the Sun. I like Days in the Sun. I think it's actually a really strong kind of Broadway feeling song that adds a lot to the musical score of this movie. I love how they incorporate all the different vocals from all the different instruments or objects in the castle personified, and they all sing about how they long for the past when they were human. And instead of it being the song Human Again, which is very more upbeat and like, another danceable song, like in a circle kind of thing, this is more of a like reflective kind of shorter melancholy tune, but it builds and builds. And I think it employs the vocals of all these talented actors and singers that they've had and really well. So I give props to Alan Menken for composing that original song for this film. The other original song that was composed for this movie is Evermore, sung by Dan Stevens, the Beast, when Belle is escaping, when Belle is like actually leaving to help her father, and he feels as though Belle's run away forever and that she's never going to come back. Now, it definitely seems like a perfect place to put a big sort of song for the Beast's character, and it needs to be there, I'll admit, but I'm not as crazy about this song. It's actually pretty beautiful. I do think that Dan Stevens' delivery is pretty strong. It's very deep, and his voice is very sonorous, and I think he has this great timbre to his tone that really makes it feel like he is the Beast singing this song. Actually, I think to the Josh Groban version, I think it holds a pretty good candle to it because, I mean, Josh Groban is an amazing vocalist, and I won't deny that Josh Groban's vocals are amazing. But Dan Stevens' version is very comparable. I don't really know which one I like more. Kind of on the fence because I'm not entirely insanely crazy about the song to begin with. But I do see its purpose in the movie, and I don't necessarily see it as, I mean, it's just short enough that you don't get too bored by it. If it went on a little bit longer at that point in the movie, you're like, okay, let's wrap this up. We get the idea, you know, the action of the big buildup at the end is coming, and we're sort of, I don't want to say we're kind of anxious for that to happen, but it's hard, you know, when you know what's going to happen in a movie like this and it plays so similar to the source material, there's very little room for things to kind of drag on and become a little bit. And that is my main issue with this movie is the pacing of it and the editing. There are scenes in there that I really feel like were way too quick and not dealt with very well at all. And then there are scenes that they kind of drag on, and it's more the former that I have more of an issue with. I really do think, I mean, the movie's definitely a good length, and I don't necessarily say it should be that much longer. Maybe a couple more, like 10, 15 minutes wouldn't hurt it. I'm not saying it should be a super long movie, but there's some parts of the movie where we jump from, obviously we're going back and forth between Belle coming to the castle and, Belle returning. There's these moments where in the animated version, I don't know, there was this real sense of the castle being really far away from the townspeople of that village and it being sort of like this journey. But in the movie, Belle kind of traverses that distance in like a really short period of time, and it kind of just feels like she just goes down the road and like takes a left into the forest and then she's in the beast's castle. There isn't this sense of adventure at all really in that. And also the way Belle's father kind of can just easily kind of reappear back in the, there's not a lot of shots of shown like kind of going in between. There's a little bit, but it doesn't feel like, it doesn't have this sense of like mystery and like what's beyond, what's down the path. There was something about the original in the animation and the artwork style and the music where when Belle's father is truly going off, on forbidden territory into the wilderness of France, you would assume, it's so mesmerizingly captivating. I mean, you're really drawn into that. And this film doesn't really play on that. And to be honest, the castle itself, although it's beautifully designed interior-wise, exterior doesn't do so much for me. I don't necessarily like how it's very CGI in terms of like the trees and the forest around it. Again, this is a huge critique I have of so many movies today is they use way too much green screen to substitute actual on-set location filming. And I understand like the wolves have to be CGI. I understand that like a lot of these fight sequences, and like I understand also that in the interior sets of the castle, but the exterior, they could have done so much with building that exterior set of the castle and also the vistas that you see around it instead of just CGI copying and pasting a forest on a mountain. It felt so much more or less magical of a place that Belle was visiting. And it did feel like the castle was just right next door, which I mean, in some ways, it kind of is because you have like people like Mrs. Potts being someone who actually once lived in the village, as you discover when they all turn into humans again, which is actually one of my favorite parts of the film. I think they do that part really well. And the way the light casts into the shot and like the way they all kind of transform. I love how Mrs. Potts is like sliding down the stairs when she catches Chip in her arms, and the way Ian McKellen like finally comes to his full Ian McKellen awesomeness as the clock and his beard is still twitching. I thought like that was really well done. But anyway, I just didn't like necessarily the two worlds, Belle's village and the castle, and then the way those two worlds were animated and realized exterior wise did not do very much for me, unfortunately. Any atmosphere that was built up was more for by the music, and of course, so much of that atmosphere was already laid in the original. I do think the dance scene that traditionally was done is beautiful, and I think her dress is actually very beautifully done. I like that obviously she was, unlike Cinderella, opting not to wear a corset in very traditional Emma Watson style, but also very fitting for Belle. And the dress is more elegant and smooth rather than the Cinderella dress being so extravagant and in your face. And to that, respect, Lily James, I think, did a good job portraying Cinderella, but I think Emma Watson's graceful she can be very graceful. I mean, some people think she's kind of robotic. I think her very, kind of, in her own sort of timid way, her graceful, delicate movements in that scene really complemented, I think, Belle's character, and I think really brought that scene to life. The animation sequence, I just want to get through, for Be Our Guest was a little bit over the top for me. I was expecting a CGI craziness for that, and I'm not surprised that it was done, and I kind of am okay with it. But, there were parts I really liked, and there were parts I didn't. I was really looking forward to that scene, but there were aspects of it that I felt like could have been done in a little bit more of a tightly knit choreographed sequence, instead of just saying, hey, let's just throw in as much, computer effects as possible to just sort of dazzle the viewer. Let's not try and like make this so choreographed and cohesive. There's something about those animation sequences in the Disney classic films that are so well choreographed animation wise and structured. And so that was lacking a little bit there. Kevin Kline's performance was phenomenal. I think he gave one of the more stellar performances of this movie. He lent such a serious tone to it. The backstory into Belle's life in Paris, it was okay. I think it was a little bit rushed and a little bit forced. This was obviously a moment where they really deviated from source material from the movie. And I'm okay with them doing that. They have to build up character backstory. They have to explain a little bit about Belle's family and where she came from. But they kind of brushed over it kind of quickly. And, again, there were moments where I really did feel like that time could have been spent maybe humanizing Belle, maybe more back when she was actually in the village. There are only a few scenes where she's not just doing her traditional Belle song before she's automatically swept off into the castle. And I mean, again, the movie was a good length, but if they had included a little bit more, and I'd be interested to see if there are some deleted scenes here where Belle is just becoming a little bit more kind of fleshed out when she's back at home. The scene where she's with her father when they first meet in that Mill House is kind of a weak scene because it is a little bit cheesy and forced. And I feel like that's where there was an opportunity for them to have moments that they had later in the film that could have served a lot better of more purpose if they had been done earlier on. So that's a little bit of issue I have with the writing. But again, my expectations were kind of, I know what Hollywood's been doing lately, and it's kind of, to be honest, I'm still pretty happy. I mean, compared to a lot of remakes and stuff that Hollywood's been doing, the fact that they made this movie that was obviously a labor of love, that there was such rich animation gone into it. I really do think that Cogsworth and Lumiere looked beautiful. I don't think that they were overly animated. Some people felt like they were almost overly animated to the fact where they couldn't really recognize any facial expressions or emotion. I didn't have that problem. I thought that they were, a 2017 representation of what the 1991 one was. And that's fine. So I see where people's criticisms come from, and I can see where people also really enjoyed it. I think the music was a highlight. So I give it best scores in the music department, even though the auto-tune with Emma, yeah, it's regrettable, but it's not necessarily the end of the world for me, and it's definitely not a deal breaker for me in terms of this film. But Luke Evans can really sing, and Emma Thompson does a beautiful Beauty and the Beast. Yes, she's no Angela Lansbury, I understand. But she does do her own take on that in a very kind of nice way without trying too hard to copy Angela, because that would have been that wouldn't have worked so well. So overall, it's a beautiful film. It'll look really good on Blu-ray, and it does have such a feel-good... I mean, one of the best sequences is towards the end of the movie. Those choreographed dances that they do when they're all human again, and also at the beginning, the opening scenes where they're doing sort of this more Marie Antoinette, Rococo period. There was a lot of that, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I was very surprised by all of that Rococo influence. They put this film in more of a time period. Instead of it being so much more medieval, it was like, okay, this is the 1800s in France. Okay, then that does give us some historical inconsistencies, like with the French Revolution and all of these things. But that's okay. It's still a fantasy film. It's a fairy tale. Take it as it is. But some of those choreographed scenes are Audra McDonald as the wardrobe. Her performance is so flamboyant and full of life, and it just feels made for like a movie musical. It's beautiful. And I do love the inclusion of Josh Gad's character being gay. But again, it was so subtle that I don't even know how people picked up on it. If it hadn't been a huge tabloid thing, I wouldn't even noticed really that much. course, these sort of things should not be a story. They should not be a big deal. But unfortunately, in the day and age we live, people are still very close-minded. So it's still important that Disney's doing this and paving the way with that kind of stuff, including an LGBT character. And I guess one more thing I will just say is the Belle song at the beginning, yes, it does feel a little bit forced, especially when you're listening to it and you're not watching the film. The original is definitely a little bit stronger in the opening, but there are some aspects about the opening that felt just perfectly choreographed that I was okay with it when I watched it in the film. But when you do listen to the opening without it, only Gaston really feels into it and everyone else feels a little bit forced, including Emma's part, unfortunately. I think she comes alive a little bit more in the reprise part of the song, but all in all, you know, Emma kind of just mixes back and forth between feeling like she's really there in a performance and sort of being a little bit more distant from it. It's not, again, a huge problem I have. I love Emma, and I do think she's a talented actress. But, you know, it's a very titular role, and she, you know, does have to carry that. And there are maybe a few moments where, like in one of the opening scenes with Kevin Kline, that, yeah, it does falter a little bit in that regard. And it's tough because it's right at the beginning of the movie, where some real exposition needs to be set up, where some real, you know, character development and emotional attachment to the characters needs to be made, and it's just not quite made there yet. Not until necessarily later in the film, after she's in the castle and she's talking with all of the, you know, characters in there. Oh, one other thing. I also felt like the inclusion of the witch, Agatha, although I understand why it was done, I do think it kind of made it seem a little strange that she like came back just for that moment. It's okay, I don't have a huge problem with it, but I just felt like in the original it was a little bit more mysterious when the rose just itself, like the spell was broken and no one else had to recast any sort of spell. The fact that the witch had to reappear, I don't know, it made it feel like the witch was just watching him all this time, when in reality I feel like the witch kind of just left him and just sort of was like, hey, well, he can sort out his own karma. If he breaks the spell, good for him, but I'm not going to stick around and watch. I'm going to go off and do my witchy things. So, I mean, I can see why they included it, because maybe it is a continuity thing. Like, where would the witch have gone? Let's make the witch a character. But, you know, I wouldn't have personally, if I was writing the story, I wouldn't have included her in the end part. But that's okay. It's a movie I can live with, and it definitely did not, like, my expectations were met, but they were not necessarily exceeded. But my expectations were pretty high. I did have to lower them a little bit once we started seeing trailers and stuff. But my expectations were pretty high, and all in all, I give this film an actual... It's really tough. I want to give it an A-. I really want to give it an A-, and I am very generous with reviewing things. It's like giving it like maybe I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. I really should probably give it a 3.5 out of 5, but I do love the casting and I do love the original music. And so for the music and Menken and all of these aspects, I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. So let me know what you thought in the comments about Beauty and the Beast. I'm very excited for all the upcoming Disney live action remakes. Just hope that it doesn't get tiring, and I hope that they don't lose the magic of the originals, because they're still so amazing and incredible. And like I said, Beauty and the Beast is one of my favorite films of all time, so has a lot to live up to. So that is my review, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope to review more movies coming up. So stay tuned and subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you. Have a wonderful one. Bye.